I didn't realize she was keeping me close until the idea of stepping away felt impossible that I didn't notice her at first. Not in the way people usually mean when they say that. She was there, unmistakably present, but nothing about her demanded attention. She didn't interrupt rooms when she entered them. She settled into them, as if she already belonged. That was probably why I didn't question it when she started appearing near me more often than anyone else. It began with simple routines. Mornings where she chose the chair beside mine instead of the many empty ones across the room. Afternoons where she paused near my desk to ask questions she already seemed to know the answers to. Evenings when she walked at my pace instead of ahead of me, matching her steps to mine without making it obvious. None of it felt deliberate. It felt practical, natural. She had a way of occupying space that was calm and assured. When she sat, she crossed her legs slowly, unhurried, as if time bent slightly around her movements. Her posture was relaxed but composed, her shoulders back, her presence steady. There was nothing rushed or uncertain about her, and standing near that kind of quiet confidence had an unexpected effect on me. I found myself slowing down without realizing it, my thoughts, my breathing, even the way I spoke. The closeness itself was subtle, a shared armrest, knees that brushed lightly when she shifted her weight. The brief warmth of her shoulder when someone passed too close behind us, and she angled her body just enough to make space. Each contact was fleeting, but my body noticed before my mind did. I became aware of textures, the smoothness of her sleeve, the faint heat through fabric, the way her perfume lingered in the air a second longer after she moved away. What surprised me most was how comfortable it felt. I was used to distance. I liked having space around me, liked knowing where I ended and where others began. But with her, the boundary blurred quietly. She didn't crowd me. She didn't invade. She simply remained close, consistently, like a constant I hadn't known was missing. Sometimes I caught her watching me, not openly, not intensely, just a calm, observant glance that lifted when I spoke and softened when I laughed. When our eyes met, she never looked away too quickly. She held the moment just long enough for me to feel seen, then returned her attention to whatever was in front of her. It wasn't flirtation. It was acknowledgement. I told myself it meant nothing, that she was just friendly, just kind, just someone who preferred company to solitude. But slowly, I began to notice the absence when she wasn't there. The extra space beside me felt colder, louder, less anchored. At that point, I still believed I wanted distance. Independence felt like control. Emotional space felt safe. But without realizing it, I had already adjusted my body to her nearness, angling my chair slightly toward hers, lingering a few seconds longer before standing, unconsciously matching the rhythm of her presence. She hadn't asked me to stay close. She hadn't reached for me or said anything that required a response. She had simply remained near me long enough for closeness to stop feeling like a choice. And I didn't yet understand what that was going to cost me. It wasn't until her hands entered the story that I understood how intentional closeness could be without ever becoming obvious. She never reached for me suddenly. There were no gestures that startled or demanded attention. Her touch arrived the way her presence always had, quietly, naturally, as if it had always belonged there. The first time it was almost nothing. I was about to leave, already halfway, turned away, when she noticed my sleeve had rolled unevenly at the wrist. "Hold on," she said softly. 2 words, barely more than breath. Her fingers closed gently around the fabric, smoothing it down with a care that felt personal, even though the action itself was practical. Her knuckles brushed my skin for just a second, warm and deliberate. I felt it travel up my arm, settling somewhere deeper than it should have. After that, the touches found their way into ordinary moments. A hand placed lightly between my shoulder blades as she guided me through a crowded space. The brief pressure of her palm on my lower back when she laughed and leaned closer to say something meant only for me. She never lingered too long, never crossed into anything that could be questioned. But each touch carried weight, not because of where it was, but because of how aware she was when she did it. Her body language spoke even when her hands didn't. When we sat together, she angled herself toward me, her knee just close enough to brush mine when she shifted. When I spoke, she leaned in slightly, her elbow resting on the arm of the chair, chin tilted as if my words deserved her full attention. The space between us felt intentional, measured, not accidental, not careless. I started noticing my reactions before I could stop myself. The way my shoulders relaxed when she touched my back. How my breath slowed when her hand rested briefly on my arm. I didn't pull away. I didn't tense. My body accepted her closeness without hesitation, and that realization unsettled me more than the touch itself. There was a moment, small, forgettable to anyone else, when we were standing side by side, watching something unfold in front of us. Without looking, she let her fingers drift to mine. Not interlacing, not holding, just resting there, the pads of her fingers warm against the back of my hand. It lasted maybe 2 seconds before she withdrew, as if to remind me that I could still choose distance if I wanted it. I didn't. The absence of her touch after those moments felt louder than its presence. I found myself aware of my hands, unsure what to do with them. I noticed how often I stood a little closer, how I adjusted my posture to make contact easier, how I leaned in before she did. The balance had shifted, and I wasn't sure when it happened. What made it harder to resist was the emotion behind it. Her touch wasn't about claiming or pulling me in. It was grounding, reassuring. Each gesture carried a quiet message. You're safe here. You're welcome. I told myself it was harmless. That touch didn't have to mean anything. But at night, I replayed those moments in my head. The warmth of her fingers, the certainty in her movements, the calm way she stepped back afterward, leaving the choice in my hands. And somewhere between remembering and wanting, I realized I was starting to crave the language she spoke so fluently, the one made of small touches and unspoken understanding. By the time our conversations began to stretch longer than they needed to, I understood that her influence wasn't just physical. It lived in the way she listened, fully, without impatience or interruption. When I spoke, she didn't rush to respond. She let silence settle between us, comfortable and unforced, as if she knew that some thoughts needed space before they could breathe. We often talked in the late hours of the day, when the lights softened and the world seemed less demanding. She would sit across from me or beside me, never directly facing, never squared off. Her posture was open, relaxed, one leg crossed over the other, hands resting loosely in her lap. When I glanced at her, she was usually already watching me, not intensely but attentively, her gaze steady and warm. She asked questions that didn't feel like probes. Simple things at first. How I felt about where I was going. What I worried about when I was alone. Questions she didn't rush to fill with advice. She waited, and in that waiting, something in me loosened. I wasn't used to being met with that kind of patience. Most people listened with the intention of responding, of correcting, of guiding. She listened as if understanding was the goal, not resolution. When I hesitated, she didn't push. She nodded slightly, a silent encouragement, her expression calm and receptive. It made me want to be honest in a way I hadn't planned. Sometimes, when I admitted something difficult, she reached out, not dramatically, just enough to bridge the space. Her hand would rest lightly on my forearm, fingers warm, thumb still. The touch wasn't meant to comfort away the feeling. It acknowledged it, and that distinction mattered. Her authority came from experience, but she never used it to stand above me. When she spoke about her own life, it was with clarity, not bitterness. She didn't dwell on mistakes or glorify them. She spoke as someone who had learned how to sit with discomfort without letting it harden her. Listening to her, I felt younger, not in a diminishing way, but in a way that allowed room to grow. I noticed how easily I began to relax around her. I stopped rehearsing what I would say. I let my thoughts come out imperfect, unfinished. When I laughed, it was unguarded. When I went quiet, she didn't rush to fill the space. She matched my rhythm, adjusting herself to the pace of my thoughts rather than pulling me toward hers. There was a moment when I realized I had shifted closer to her without noticing. Our chairs were angled toward each other now, knees nearly touching. When I leaned back, her shoulder brushed mine, and neither of us moved away. The contact felt natural, earned through trust rather than impulse. Inside me, something unfamiliar was forming, a sense of emotional safety I hadn't known I was missing. It frightened me, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt real. I was beginning to rely on her presence, her steadiness, the quiet way she made room for me to exist without performance. I still told myself I was in control, that I could step back whenever I wanted. But as I sat there, listening to her speak, feeling the warmth of her arm beside mine, I realized how easily ease had replaced caution. And once that happens, distance no longer feels like strength. It starts to feel like loss. The realization didn't arrive all at once. There was no sharp line where I could say this is where everything changed. It crept in quietly, the way her presence always had, until one small moment made it impossible to ignore. I had news, something minor, something that didn't matter much in the grand scheme of things. The kind of thing I would normally keep to myself or mention casually to anyone who happened to be nearby. But before I even thought about it, my body turned toward her. My first instinct was to tell her. The certainty of that surprised me more than the news itself. She was sitting beside me, angled comfortably in my direction, her arm resting along the back of the seat. When I leaned closer to speak, I realized how natural it felt to enter her space. There was no hesitation, no calculation. I didn't wonder if I was too close. I simply was. As I spoke, she listened with that same steady attention, her eyes focused on mine. When I finished, she smiled softly and let out a quiet laugh. Not loud, not dismissive. It was warm, affectionate. The kind of response that says, "I'm glad you shared this with me," even if the words themselves are simple. The laugh faded, and silence took its place. Not an empty silence, a full one. I noticed how close we were then, my arm resting along the back of her chair, her shoulder nearly touching my chest. I could feel her warmth through the thin layers of fabric, the rise and fall of her breathing. She leaned back slightly, settling into the space my arm created without looking at me, as if the decision required no discussion. That was the moment. I didn't pull away. I didn't feel the urge to straighten up or create space. Instead, my arm relaxed, my hand resting easily behind her shoulder. The distance I used to guard so carefully was gone, and its absence didn't feel dangerous. It felt right. A strange mix of emotions surfaced all at once: comfort, longing, and a quiet fear. I realized how often I had been reaching for her without noticing. How her reactions mattered more to me than anyone else's. How I had started measuring my days by whether or not I would see her. My mind tried to catch up, to impose rules and caution. "This is where you should stop," it said. "This is where you should remember who you are, what you're supposed to want." But my body didn't listen. It stayed where it was, relaxed and certain. She turned her head slightly then, just enough that her temple brushed my arm. The contact was unintentional, or at least it pretended to be. She exhaled softly, a small sound that settled into me, and for a second, I wondered if she felt it too. The shift. The quiet understanding that something had crossed a line neither of us had drawn. I didn't speak. Neither did she. We stayed like that, sharing the space between breaths, the kind of closeness that doesn't need to be named to be real. Later, when I was alone, I tried to imagine pulling away, creating distance again, going back to the version of myself that needed space to feel safe. I couldn't, because somewhere in that quiet moment, without asking or deciding, I had stopped wanting distance at all. The world had a way of noticing what we were careful not to name. It happened in small, almost invisible ways: glances that lingered a beat too long, conversations that paused when we entered a room together, the subtle shift in tone when people addressed us side by side instead of separately. Nothing was ever said outright, but the awareness was there, hovering just beneath the surface. I became conscious of it the moment we stepped into more public spaces together. The air felt different, brighter, sharper, less forgiving. I noticed how close I stood to her, how instinctively I adjusted my pace to match hers, how often my attention drifted back to her even when others were speaking. I wondered if it showed. I wondered if it should. She seemed to sense the tension before I did. When my posture stiffened or my gaze dropped, her hand found mine in small, grounding gestures. A brief squeeze of my fingers, her thumb brushing slowly across my knuckles. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to remind me I wasn't alone in feeling it. The calm certainty of her touch steadied me, even as my thoughts raced. I began to feel the weight of contrast between us, not as a flaw, but as a reality I couldn't ignore. She carried herself with a confidence shaped by experience, by years of knowing who she was and what she could survive. I was still learning that. Standing beside her made me aware of my own edges, the places where I was still unsure. And I worried that others could see it too. There were moments when I almost stepped back, when instinct told me to create space before someone else pointed it out for me. In those moments, she didn't pull me closer. She didn't challenge my hesitation. She simply stayed where she was, open and unshaken, letting me decide whether distance was truly what I wanted. Once, as we sat together in a crowded place, I noticed the way a few people glanced between us, curiosity thinly veiled. My shoulders tightened, and I shifted slightly away without meaning to. She noticed immediately. Without turning her head, she reached for my hand under the table and rested it in hers, her fingers wrapping around mine with quiet confidence. The warmth of her palm seeped into me, steady and unhurried. "Breathe," she murmured, so softly only I could hear. I did. That was when I realized the tension wasn't coming from her. It was coming from my fear of being seen, of having something honest exposed before I had fully understood it myself. Being near her felt natural. Being observed while near her felt complicated. We didn't talk about it then. We let the understanding remain unspoken, woven into the spaces between us. But I could feel the question forming, pressing gently against my chest. How much did I care about the world's perception? And how much was I willing to risk for the quiet certainty I felt when she was close? As the evening went on, my grip on her hand relaxed. I leaned closer again, drawn back by the familiarity of her presence. She didn't look at me, didn't smile knowingly. She simply remained, offering no reassurance beyond her steadiness. In that moment, I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. The idea of pulling away hurt more than the thought of staying close. And once that balance shifted, the tension no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a choice waiting to be made. The conversation didn't begin with a dramatic confession. It started the way most honest things do, quietly, when the noise of the day had finally fallen away. We were alone, sitting close but not touching, the space between us charged with everything we hadn't said yet. The room was dim, lit by a single warm lamp that softened her features and made the shadows feel gentle instead of heavy. She was the one who spoke first. "I've been meaning to ask you something," she said, her voice calm but thoughtful. Not uncertain, careful. She turned toward me then, folding one leg beneath her, giving me her full attention. "And I want you to know you don't owe me an answer you're not ready to give." That alone made my chest tighten. I nodded, suddenly aware of my hands resting in my lap, fingers intertwined as if bracing. I waited. "I know I've kept you close," she continued, meeting my eyes without flinching. "Not to trap you. Never that. But because you feel easy to be around. Because when you're here, I don't feel like I have to guard myself." Her honesty disarmed me. There was no apology in her tone, no attempt to soften the truth. Just clarity. I took a breath, feeling the weight of everything I've been holding back. "I noticed," I said quietly, and I didn't stop it. Her lips curved into a small, understanding smile. Not triumphant, not relieved, just present. "I wondered if you would," she said. Silence followed, thick but steady. I shifted closer without thinking, our knees brushing. She didn't move away. Instead, she let her hand rest beside mine, close enough that our fingers touched when I exhaled. "I used to think distance was what kept me safe," I admitted. "That if I didn't let anyone get too close, I could stay in control." But somewhere along the way, I paused, searching for the right words. "I stopped wanting that. With you. She reached for my hand then, slow and deliberate, giving me time to pull back if I wanted. I didn't. Her fingers threaded through mine, warm and sure. The contact sent a quiet rush through me. Not urgency, not heat. Just relief. I never wanted to rush you, she said softly. I just wanted to be honest when the moment came. I looked at her, really looked at her. The lines that spoke of laughter and resilience, the calm confidence in her gaze, the vulnerability she wasn't afraid to show me. I was afraid, I said, of what people would think, of what it meant, of whether I was ready. And now, she asked. I squeezed her hand gently, grounding myself in the feel of her. Now I'm more afraid of pretending this doesn't matter. That was when she leaned in, resting her cheek lightly against my shoulder. The weight of her head there felt intimate in a way words couldn't capture. I felt her breath warm against my collarbone, her body relaxed, trusting. We stayed like that for a while, no rush to define anything further. The conversation had done what it needed to do. It cleared the fog. It didn't erase fear, but placed it where it belonged, beside hope, not above it. When she finally lifted her head, her forehead brushed mine, a quiet, affectionate touch that felt like agreement rather than promise. Whatever came next, we would choose it together. And for the first time, that felt enough. The days that followed didn't feel dramatically different, and yet everything had shifted. There was a new ease between us, a sense of alignment that made even silence feel intentional. We didn't announce anything to the world. We didn't need to. The choice had already been made in the way we moved toward each other without hesitation. One quiet morning, we sat together as light filtered softly through the room, the kind of light that makes time feel slower. She was beside me, close enough that our legs touched from hip to knee. Not pressing, just present. Her shoulder rested lightly against my arm, the contact steady and warm. I noticed how naturally my body adjusted to hers, how my arm curved behind her without thought, how she leaned back just enough to fit there. I thought about who I had been when this began, how much space I needed, how carefully I measured closeness. That version of me felt distant now, not wrong, just finished. Nearness no longer felt like something to manage. It felt like something to accept. We talked easily about ordinary things, plans that didn't need urgency, memories that surfaced gently. Sometimes our conversation faded into comfortable quiet, and in those moments, she would reach for my hand, tracing slow, absent patterns over my knuckles. Each movement was unhurried, affectionate in a way that felt deeply human. At one point, she turned toward me, studying my face with a softness that made my chest tighten. "You seem lighter," she said. I smiled, brushing my thumb over the back of her hand. "I feel like I stopped running from something," I replied. "I just didn't know it was you." She laughed quietly at that, then leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my cheek. It wasn't rushed or demanding, just a simple, tender gesture that lingered long enough to be felt. Her lips were warm, familiar, and when she pulled back, her forehead rested briefly against mine. That small closeness said everything. Later, as we walked together, our hands naturally found each other. Her fingers fit into mine as if they always had. I noticed how little I thought about who might see us. The fear had softened, replaced by something steadier. I wasn't choosing nearness out of rebellion or impulse. I was choosing it because it felt honest. She glanced at me as we walked, her expression open and calm. No expectation, no pressure, just shared understanding. The kind that comes from two people who have decided to meet each other where they are, not where the world thinks they should be. I realized then that nearness wasn't about losing myself. It was about being fully present, letting someone stand beside me without armor, letting warmth replace distance. As the day faded into evening, we sat together once more, her head resting against my shoulder, my hand resting comfortably at her waist. I felt the quiet steadiness of her there, the rhythm of her breathing, the simple truth of the moment. Distance had once felt like safety, but nearness, chosen, mutual, and unafraid, had become something better. It had become home.